All right, we will get started. So I will just open us up with a karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te atakura, he teo, he hoka, he hohu, ti hei, Māori ora. Kia ora koutou, my name is Emily Hodges. I work for Harbour Sport as a sport development advisor and the Women and Girls Strategic Lead. To start us off, just a bit of housekeeping. So please note we are recording the webinar. We ask that you keep your microphone on mute and your video off while we are running the webinar. And if you have any questions, please use the chat function. This is our agenda for this evening. A quick note, after both Alida and Glenn have spoken, we will have about 5 to 10 minutes of question and answers. So we'll just group them together. Wonderful. So we're lucky enough to have Alida and Glenn with us tonight to discuss how to address equity and belonging in community sport. So without further ado, I will hand over to Alida.
Great, thank you, Emily. I'll just share my screen. Can you see that?
Yep, all good.
Perfect. Right, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko hui hui mai nei, ko ingarangi, ko kōtirana, ko eirana, ko hōrana te whakapaparanga mai. Engari e ko rotorua te whenua tupu, no oti poti o, ke kiriroa o e no hōna. Thanks to Emily for the welcome. A bit about me. I have English, Scottish, Irish and Dutch ancestry, but Rotorua is where I grew up. I'm from Ōtepoti, Dunedin, and I'm currently living in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton. I worked in sport for a number of years. I worked in 2 RSOs, an NSO, and the Wellington Phoenix for a season in communication and marketing roles. I've also been involved in football club committees off and on for around 10 years. And I've just started working again for my 3rd RSO. I'm now at Waikato Bay of Plenty, or WAIBOP football, as the legacy manager for the FIFA Women's World Cup. I recently completed my PhD on equity and belonging in community sports organisations. My research focused on football organisations, but I've also worked with other organisations, both in sport and outside sport, to explore how they can address equity and belonging in their organisation. So why equity and belonging? When I first started my research, I was looking at diversity and inclusion, which are the terms we most often use and hear about. As part of my research, I surveyed the staff and board members of the 6 football federations in Aotearoa on their thoughts on diversity and inclusion. I was quite surprised to receive a few, aggressive responses. Some people seem to be quite triggered by the words diversity and inclusion, which got me thinking. And I was also curious as to why there was such a persistent lack of progress in diversity for many of our sports organisations. So I did some digging, and I found that the 3 terms, diversity and inclusion and equality, have historically been preferred mostly because they're more palatable and less confronting to those in positions of power or privilege, and not on addressing the core issues. They tend to focus on improving the experience for everyone. Equality, which was a term popularised in the 70s, assumes that everyone starts from the same place and that they face the same barriers, therefore require the same support to then have access to the same opportunities. Equality focused on social justice and the introduction of affirmative action programs to increase the number of underrepresented groups and organisations. While affirmative action initiatives had been somewhat successful in increasing numbers in organisations, this wasn't extending to leadership roles. And there was also a backlash where some people believed affirmative action initiatives were a form of preferential treatment, and that seems to have carried on through till today. But in the 1990s, for those reasons, there was a move to focus on diversity. This saw a shift to focus on the individual, and the definition of diversity widened to include ideas such as diversity of thought. The term diversity tends to include all underrepresented communities without identifying specific needs or barriers. And the shift to diversity also saw initiatives become more professionalised, so the benefit was to the organisation. This could be through economic gains, different ways of working, greater profitability, more innovation. They're often the reasons that we hear businesses wanting to address diversity, or the reasons that CEOs need to make those moves. It's also unclear at what point the outcome of diversity is reached. So when an organisation is considered diverse, it's difficult to determine. So then we saw a move to focusing on inclusion in the early 2000s. This saw the focus on the individual increase, with the definition of inclusion focusing on employees being able to express themselves and fit into their workplace. Like diversity, inclusion was an outcome, but it was not articulated what that outcome looked like once reached or how to get there. We currently find ourselves in a similar position as the 1990s, where equality, diversity, and inclusion initiatives have somewhat increased the number of women in some organisations, but only to a certain point. And it's not often very intersectional. And it's really not translated into real change. We still lack gender equity in leadership roles. Any change is not systemic or sustainable, and has had only limited impact on processes or the culture of sports organisations. And this is largely because equality, diversity, or inclusion tend to focus on policies with the intent of trying to physically increase the number of underrepresented communities. They do not really address the actual barriers like prejudice or bias. So then I looked at equity. It's more than just increasing numbers. Equity is about providing the means to address and break down systemic barriers so that everyone is able to have a positive experience, as well as equitable opportunities and outcomes. Shifting the focus from equality, diversity, or inclusion to equity provides the systemic framework to understand how underrepresented communities best receive the individual and organisational support they need in their workplace. However, there also needs to be consideration of people's personal experiences. By pairing equity with a sense of belonging helps ensure equity initiatives are also meaningful. Belonging is multifaceted in that it requires an environment where people feel safe to be themselves, and equally important is that a person belongs to themselves, therefore can belong wherever they are. And by that, I mean having self-acceptance or love. So while inclusion puts the onus on the individual fitting in, belonging places the onus on the organisation to provide a safe environment where people can be themselves. We can have things in common with other people, but we don't feel the need to assimilate or change ourselves to fit in or be included. So together, with an environment that fosters belonging, and when we belong to ourselves, the result is an organisation where views, beliefs, and values of every person are openly shared and respected. I think the best way to sum this up is in sport, we often talk about wanting people to fall in love with our sport, and we're often trying to work out how to get them to stay in love with us. But how does our sport show people that we love them back? If everyone feels loved and supported when they're engaging with our sport, then they know it's equitable and that they belong. So what can we do to show people that our organisation loves them? From my research, I developed this framework, Te Pokapā, the Belonging and Equity Matrix. Po are the strands or the pillars that make up the matrix. Po also refers to the foundations or the principles or energies that exist in the world. Kapa means the collective, the team or group. Therefore, Te Pokapā is the collective or grouping of the strands or principles that are woven together to address equity and belonging. I've used a woven image to capture that. While there are 4 aspects, they overlap and are interconnected. An organisation needs to address all 4 aspects, so we need threads from all 4 sides to be woven evenly. And the image is unfinished on purpose, because the threads that an organisation chooses will be individual and up to them. So the finished Te Pokapā will be different for each organisation. Each of the 4 aspects are made up of several strands. First, we have showing. This looks to the future. It includes having equity as part of your business strategy. It's your formal policies, but it's a little bit more than that. It's your values, your purpose, part of your decision-making process, and how those policies are put into practice at the heart of everything that you do. Next is telling, which focuses on our past. It's reviewing our whakapapa, our history, to ensure the stories told include everyone. As part of my research, I looked at women's involvement in sports organisations and found that women's voices were missing in so many places. Women were banned from several sports in the 1920s, including football, and that ban wasn't lifted until the 1970s. I worked in football for 6 years and had no idea that there was even this ban had existed, or that there'd been separate women's organisations that administered football. History says that the men's and women's organisations merged in 2000, but I can tell you that's not actually what happened. In most cases, the women's organisation was dissolved by the men's organisations. Another example of telling is with our whakapapa. I was looking at the website for my old football club in Wellington, and they have a history section, which is great. Not often, it doesn't happen all the time. But in this history section, I got to page 2 before they mentioned the women's teams. And it was when they'd won the top league for the first time. For men, it was when teams joined, key presidents, committee members. But for women, no mention of our first women's club captain, the first women's team to join. The women's team literally had to win the top league of the region to get a mention. Next, we have doing, and this is the present, what we do day to day. It's our informal practices, but often our informal practices has come about from an unequitable starting point or bias. So this is things like the boys' club, or banter, or drinks after work, or the golf course, places where it's often just the boys. That's where they're building relationships, and often that talk turns to work. Informal practices are hard to call out because of their nature. If I question not being invited to golf, or call out the banter, I look like the killjoy, right? It's just drinks, it's just jokes. So it's not so much about who is included, but who is left out. So to address this, we need to think about rituals and creating new rituals that will eventually become informal practices. How are people welcomed into our organisation? What's the induction process? How can people call out banter or jokes that make them feel uncomfortable in a safe way? Encourage challenging unconscious bias. In my research, just over a third of men who work in our regional football federations said they believe gender has no impact on the opportunities a person has in the sports sector, when all the evidence and a lot of experiences says it does. So there's a gap in the knowledge for some of our tāne in our sports organisations. In national sports teams like the All Blacks, we often hear about how they inherit the jersey and the honour that comes with that. There is an expectation to leave the jersey and the team in a better place than when they arrived. I think this can apply to organisations too. Currently in my work for Waibot Football, how can I bring honour to my role and ensure that I leave things in a better space than when I arrived? In Owen Eastwood's book Belonging, he talks about having our time in the sun. They were all linked to those who have previously worked at Waibot Football and all those who will work here in the future. But it's currently my turn in the sun. And then finally is being. This is our relationship with people and also our sense of self. This includes having a safe environment through building trust and psychological safety. In my research, I found 36% of women felt they'd been discriminated against within their current organisation. This is high, especially when women only make up a third of staff in the football federations. Despite this, 75% of women also said they felt a sense of belonging. Not as high as men at 96%, but when I asked what gave them a sense of belonging, most women focused on relationships with their colleagues and wanting to be recognised for their skills. So it's great that so many felt they belong, but relying on the opinion of others is tenuous. There isn't a sense of self-acceptance or love. And with the high rate of discrimination, it's definitely not a safe environment. In contrast, most men said they felt like they belonged because they're heard, they feel like people listen to them, and they felt empowered. So their sense of belonging was tied to their self-acceptance. It was clear from the comments that some of the discrimination women experienced happens quite openly in the office, but it's not called out or addressed. So then it's not surprising when we hear about research from the Human Rights Commission, which showed that most people don't formally report discrimination or bullying when it happens. If it's happening openly in the office, your boss doesn't say anything, then that's going to really deter people from doing anything formal. Plus, half of those who did report it were left dissatisfied with the outcome. So you're not going to report it if it happens again. So it's really important to have clear, transparent, and safe processes that are victim-survivor centric. I think a core part of addressing being is adopting the principle of whanaungatanga. Whanaungatanga embraces whakapapa and focuses on relationships, that the collective group expect the support and help from others in the group. It's often described as the glue that binds people together, providing the foundations for a sense of unity, belonging, and cohesion. So to treat each other with aroha, with love, compassion, empathy, is an expectation of whanaungatanga. So if I go back to the phrase, how can our sports show people that we love them? It's addressing these four aspects: showing, telling, doing, and being. I think that these four aspects are practical and straightforward and are all things that we can start to address and build on and adapt as we go. To finish, before I hand over to Glenn, just something to think about as well is to ask yourself and your organisation, where is your belonging shadow? Where have you felt not noticed or unknown or denied? And once you've answered that, can you reframe that with a positive statement for your organisation? In our mahi, or our work, we pledge that nobody suffers this. So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand over to Glenn from the Silverdale Rugby Club to share some of the amazing work that they've been doing.
Cool. Thank you, Alida. Let me just get the technology right. There we go. Okay. Can you all see the
Yeah, we
slide?
can see it, Glenn.
Okay, cool. Hi, everybody. Kia ora. I'm Glenn from Silverdale Rugby Club. I'm the female rugby development director at the club. It's a volunteer role. And I sit on the Council of Clubs representing Silverdale for North Harbour Rugby Union, so a volunteer role. I want to just take you through today or this evening. I wanted to connect what Alida's gone through with some of the work we're doing at the club. This is a really cool piece of work she's done, her PhD, and when I read through it, it really resonated with a lot of the work that we're doing at the club. And I wanted to provide a few practical examples of the work we've done and how it relates to the four pieces of the mat as such. Before I start, I just wanted to say we've really been going pretty hard at our women's rugby strategy since probably October last year. I don't want to come across as arrogant this evening. We aren't getting everything right. We're getting a lot of things right. I'm lucky to have a lot of good people around me. I'll share a couple of stories. But yeah, there's a lot of work for us still to be doing. We're really loving what we are doing. But let me share with you a few key pieces of our journey so far. Yeah. So in terms of showing and in terms of governance, and you end up with this women's strategy and you go, where do I start? We were very lucky to get the Women and Girls Club Check. That's a strategic document that's available to all of us. That was sent to us last year. It gave us a really good perspective on the four cornerstones of how to set up our women's strategy. What was really important to us from the get-go was we wanted to build a sustainable program for our communities. We have to represent our communities, and our communities, certainly on the Hibiscus Coast, are just over 50% female. So we were really passionate as a club. We wanted to support our communities with a strong women's program. We didn't want to just set up a team. We wanted to set up a program. So if one of us stepped out, that program is still going to drive ahead. I don't think you'll be able to hear this video, but we ran a video session. Well, so that was our value session that we started out with. It got pretty loud, but we really asked the players and a bunch of people in a room, the coaches, what would a really terrible rugby program look like to you? How would that feel? What would an amazing rugby program look like? How would that feel? And we just sat back and listened. The playing group came up with the motto He Waka Eke Noa, which really means let's paddle this canoe together as one unit, as one family, and that's become our team motto, and everybody seems to embrace that quite nicely. We then set off and set up a game plan, a strategy really, where we set our goals for the year, for the next year. What are the must-have activities that we really have to land as a club to help deliver on what the players want from us? And then how do we measure our progress? How do we measure success? And how do we check in to see how things are progressing and maybe what needs to adjust? A theme that was kind of that was touched on a little bit early is this equality versus equity. It was fascinating because I felt at times, even myself, I was coming across as a bit of a zealot. I was a bit of a radical, chasing equality. Hey, why have the men got this and we don't, the women don't have it? And then you kind of realize when you talk to your players that actually what they want are things that are they want things that are going to make them feel comfortable at the club, things that are going to help them to perform, to help them connect with the club. What they're really after is equity. So if you can see that picture in front of you there, we switched the focus away from, okay, well, if the men get jackets, hoodies, we should get them, to, well, what do you want? And some of the feedback was, I wouldn't mind having a babysitter. So for us, that meant we need to do what we can to provide childminders for some of the players who came to practice and needed us to look after their children. And that could have been me, it could have been one of my daughters, it could have been our amazing manager Jess. But yeah, we really, and the more we focused on equity, the more people started to listen. So that was a pretty key learning for us early on. In terms of Tallinn and our history, our whakapapa, we've got, Silverdale's been around since 1887, pictures of the clubhouse being built. In 1998, there's some pictures of our seven-a-side team. In that 1998 picture, bottom right, kneeling, is Nikki. She's on our women's committee. She's been heavily involved in the club for many, many years. We had a team in 2019, a 10-a-side team, the centralized, we had a few players at the centralized Barbarians from 2020 to 2022. And then in 2020, we really picked up on a good sevens program for some of our younger players at colleges, because we knew we had to connect into that pathway. The college pathway, we had 2 under-15 seven-a-side teams and an under-18s team that we entered into the Silverdale Club Day and into the Pacifica all-female seven-a-side tournament. So there was a lot of history in the club, and we wanted to connect that moving forward. We don't know exactly how much history there was with women playing at the club before, the 1990s or late 1990s, but it's important for us as a club to recognize that history. and for the players moving forward to understand that history and represent that history. We have 250 female juniors. This is last year, 2022. We don't have final numbers for this year. We've got 700, last year I think we had 747 total juniors. We've got 250 females. So we've got a very vibrant junior program. We got good college rugby connections with Rangitoto, Orewa College, Whangapara. And we've got 75 female volunteers, which is that's at the club, which is pretty cool. You can see our manager in the middle there, Jess, and the picture on the right hand side. She's she's amazing for our program. Very lucky to have her. But yeah, our volunteers are pretty much the glue that binds all our programs together at the club. Sorry if I'm talking too quickly. So here we are. It's late October, and we kind of going, geez, we got a couple of players from the Barbarians. What are we going to do? How are we going to pull together a women's program? Well, and where do we start? So as I've touched on, we had that women and girls governance, the checklist, that strategic document. We had our game plan set up. So we felt like we were in a good place to get going, but we still didn't have any players. So where to from here? We decided as one of our sort of doing strategies to, like I mentioned, we wanted to build a program, not just a team. So we had to create a strong sense of belonging and inclusiveness. We had to create equity, focus on what the players needed. The players weren't, and the coaches weren't always going to get what they wanted, but we had to at least provide what they needed. And then focus on that female experience, focus more on what the females needed to have a good female experience rather than trying to chase equality. As part of our doing, we asked the ladies, would you prefer to have a polo shirt, a branded polo shirt from the club? Would you prefer to have a number one that you can wear with, black pants, black shoes? They opted to go with the number ones. So those are actually just coming through this week. One of the rituals we quite precious about is making sure our debutants are recognized. We really want to build a sense of belonging with these players at the club. A lot of these players don't come from Silverdale, so they need to understand our heritage and really feel connected to the club. So a debutant gets a debutant pin, the name's on the back of the pin, similar to what I've got on my shirt this evening. And it's really cool. Sometimes now I can drive around Orewa and I can actually see some of our players walking around in their training tees, and these are players that didn't grow up at Silverdale Rugby Club. So I feel we're starting to connect with these players, and it's really good to see how they're starting to connect and give back to the club. The other area we focused on as part of the doing is we really wanted to have one club, a one club culture. So everywhere we went, whether it's the sevens, whether it's training, whether it's playing at tournaments, we wanted to travel as one team. It was incredibly important for us that the females, the women felt included, they felt safe, they felt comfortable around the men. So we did whatever we could to build a bond of trust. On the right-hand side, the top right, you can see a picture of, we took 2 men's teams and 2 women's teams down to the Mount in early January, went down to a sevens tournament at the Mount. We were the only women's entry to have 2 women's teams entered. Both teams made the semis, which was a bit of a bonus, but that actual picture on the right is us 60 people crammed into our backpackers. The women were the backpackers, and we ate this massive spaghetti bolognese together. And that for me was a really cool moment to see how everybody was coming together as one club, and the ladies were starting to feel comfortable around the men. We ask our players to sometimes give back. On Saturday, we had our Prems women come down, and we had our junior club day, and so they got involved. And I'll just play you this little video. You can see the ladies running the field. Alrighty. So yep, we got to talk about kit, because we know how much the players like the kit. And so this is not the club investing money. This is our amazing manager Annalise Bromley. She found a grant to help us get new kit for the players. So this is money that is funded through a grant. And one of the rituals we really enjoy, and this is across the club actually, is players warming up. You can see in the photograph, they're in their training tees, they're representing their sponsors, but they just look neat, and they look like they're part of one team, one club. In terms of being, and really just, wanting to create a safe space and wanting the women to just be themselves, we also got a grant. Annalise worked with North Harbour. We got a grant to redo our 2 female changing rooms, and we converted 4 of our showers to have lockable, closable doors. So now we got 2 women's changing rooms branded up with pictures of the players in there. There's pictures going back to our team in the 90s, our youth teams. It's really a space we want the players to be able to sit down and just feel this is their safe space, their own space. And we've now got 7 showers that the players can use, with hair dryers, and they look pretty cool. So our female changing rooms have been quite key to the development of our female strategy. It's actually something that comes across a lot. People ask, have you got your own changing rooms for female? And then we're always trying to get the players to laugh together. As I said, we train together, we laugh together. We just want to we are a community club, and we represent our community by being together as one big club, whilst recognizing our diversity. So we now have 33 registered women today. We had 2 more join our program recently, which is pretty cool. That's a picture of us after playing, I think that was Ponsonby. Oh, sorry, that's Manurewa. Sorry, we played against 4 Black Ferns, which was pretty cool. We had a little 16-year-old halfback playing against a Black Fern. So we've got these amazing experiences, which our players are lucky to be exposed to at a club level. And this is something you'll see at club level. You'll see Black Ferns, whereas with the female game, you won't necessarily see many All Blacks trotting around your club. So that was a real cool experience for us. Really good. We focus a lot on after-match celebrations and really celebrating our time on the field and off the field together. And there's just some feedback, top right, on the manager for Manurewa, which for us is a real good benchmark on how we are progressing in terms of building an inclusive culture. This is the last slide, for second last. We've helped our players to understand the contribution they're giving back to our club with this women's program, because we've got so many junior parents now saying, wow, my daughter has now got a hero in the women's team, or the youngsters now see a pathway in the club. So we got those 250 females going, wow, I could one day play for that Prems team. And that for us is pretty awesome. We do what we can on social, and if you want to come along to our Ladies' Day, I think that date's just been pushed out because the match we were supposed to play on that day, the Auckland team had to cancel. But yep, our Ladies' Day will be coming up. I think it's now on the 20th. We also have an academy program for our women. It's sponsored by the club. And if you want to be part of it, you talk to our academy director, Glenn Donovan, and we have a female instructor comes down, Bex, and she runs the class. There we go. All righty. Sorry, I felt like I've spoken very quickly and spoken a lot. Some closing tips, and these are things which, we've learned sometimes the hard way. Firstly, if you're I get people asking me, so how do we do it? Do we have to get a coach, or, do I have to get a player? I think the main thing is, the priority is get top-down strategic buy-in from your board, from your committee, from your club, from your community, your subcommittees, your junior club. You have to sell a bit of sizzle and just show how important this women's strategy is to the future of the club. Understand your club's problems, your issues, what are the goals, and tie into those goals and show how your female strategy can help them achieve the club goals. We've got a really cool women's committee, which we've got 4 women on our committee, and they're amazing. They prefer me to not get involved, which is cool, because I think when I do, it just makes things worse. So it's get a women's committee and empower them, because they are doing, I know at our club, amazing things. Don't be a zealot, don't be a radical, be reasonable, win friends and ambassadors. That's something we maybe learned the hard way. Just understand other people and what they want from the women's game, and help them achieve that. Get sponsors and grants. There is grant money out there, so work it, get that money, it's free. Represent your communities, not your ego. So what we say in there is, don't try and build an empire and be the best team that's going to, thrash everybody in the league. Remember, you're representing your communities, and build that program. Don't just build a team. When I say adjust the men's game for the female experience, you look at the men's game, see what's good and what's bad. But remember, you're dealing with females, and so adjust the good parts for what you need the female experience to be. But ask your players, ask your committee, what do you think this should be? Start somewhere and then just adjust as you go. Remember, men compete to bond, and women like to bond, have a good laugh together before they compete. So laugh a lot together, do whatever you can to help these women feel settled in your club, feel like they can be themselves, and laugh a lot together. There's some amazing resources out there. Don't be a victim. Don't say, oh, this is so tough. It's actually not. There's a woman and girls checklist. There's this PhD thesis from Alida. There's so many people out there wanting to help you. Learn from them, get the shortcuts. There's a lot of free resource out there in this space. Do the small things well. Just look at those little things, like the little things that sometimes mean a lot to your players. To ask them what they want and try and do the small things well. Again, we've got a really good manager, Annalise, and we've got an amazing committee. They help in that regard, but do the small things well. Last thing, there are no shortcuts here. This is not going to be easy. Good things take time, great things take longer. Be patient, work with people, win friends, ambassadors, set your strategy, but be patient. It's not going to happen overnight. Cool. I think that's us.
That was awesome, Glenn. Thank you both, Leah and Glenn.
How's the time? Oh, shit.
No, you did well. Cool. We will open the floor for questions. So you can either flick on your microphone or you can put it in the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to send them through.
Alida's got a PhD. She's going to answer everything.
Tap into the resource.
I loved your examples, Glenn. There's some such amazing, I want to move back to Auckland and join your rugby team at the moment. So
I was thinking the same thing. I'm in Auckland, but I was like, this makes me want to play rugby.
yeah.
And that's what we want. But you know, I've painted a really good picture. We have had ups and downs, and I when I stepped back and got that committee going, it really took off. And when you know Jess took over the management of the team, it really gave. She's a very empathetic individual, and it gave the ladies a soundboard to talk to her. So yeah, we've definitely not done everything perfectly, and there's still a long way to go. But yeah, we're having a lot of fun.
Well, I'll jump in with a question, and it's for both of you. So a lot of clubs and sports organisations are starting out on their journey in the equity and belonging space. What is your advice for helping them kind of start out their journey?
I'll touch on a little bit of advice Jeff Alley gave me. Sorry, Alida. Then you can. When we were starting out, and sometimes you're very tactical. You're going, shit, we want to get a sevens team together, and I've got to do the strategy. But you know, strategy without action is hallucination. So we need to get. He said to me, mate, get tournaments. And I saw a little question pop up there in terms of recruitment. It's like, you can't train for 6 months if you don't have a tournament coming up. So try and set up tournaments, phone people in. We phoned Paramahoe, we phoned around and just said, hey, could we come to yours for a bit of a game? Could we? So when you're setting up and you get your players going, get some tournaments so they can actually have something to work towards. And I found that advice just quite good from Jeff Alley.
Yeah, great advice. Alida, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's probably similar. Like, I think that it's just to start, just to do something. And that was always, I guess, coming from a club and a sport background, I was always really keen to make sure that whatever the PhD, how it panned out, I always want it to be practical and easy to implement, which I hope I achieved. But that's why I used try to keep it just simple terms, like just like show your commitment to equity and you know, and tell your stories about being equitable, and just trying to just do one little thing in each of those 4 areas will just start to make a difference. But it's hard because some things might not work, and so you know, and some things might, but it's just trying them. And I think if you can, yeah, just start is always the for me is always the best step, I think.
And there's a question there I see from Tracy around what does our recruitment plan look like, which I'll touch on because it feeds into what you're saying there, Alida. It's so what we did is we separated my role from coaching and managing, and let me drive the strategy and the relationships and the recruitment. But what's really important is if you're talking about equity and inclusion and all that stuff, you have to meet it. Because if one player comes to your set training to suss it out and she goes away going, that was bullshit, or that was amazing, I felt really safe. If she goes back, she didn't like it, you're going to lose 3 players. If she goes back and says, wow, that felt really cool, I felt really included, I had a cognitive dissonance, what I expected didn't happen or did happen, then she's going to get 3 of her mates to come back with her. And so for us, the recruitment has been word of mouth through players. You start with a baseline, but you have to deliver on your promise. You have to deliver from the very first session. If you're talking equity and inclusion, you've got to deliver that. And if you do, then you will get more players coming and staying.
Awesome. I will share my screen again. Cool. So just before we wrap up, I wanted to quickly touch on Harbour Sports efforts in this space. So as an organisation, we've recognised the importance of actively addressing gender equity, both internally and externally. Some of the steps we've taken from an internal perspective are detailed on the slide. I won't go into too much depth, but at, I guess, that top level, we've got an equitable board and leadership team. We have investment from them. We have an internal working group. So similar to Glenn's committee, we have people working directly in this space. We have formal strategic and operational plans. We've done reviews. We are actively showing on our website our dedication to this space. Cool. So just to finish off, in Alita's PhD, she defines equity as what is fair and asks the following questions. So I wanted to send you off with these questions front of mind, as they can be a good indication of where you're at. And I will just close us off with a karakia. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou ariki, ihu karaiti, me te arawa o te atua, me te whiwhinga ko tahitanga, ki te wairua tapu, ake, āmeni. Thank you very much for attending. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.